to consider comments and testimony concerning rate adjustments for leases commencing or being renewed between October 1st, 2024 and September 30th, 2025. I will now take roll call. Please respond each person. Belen Arbor? Present. Elliot Churton?
Yep.
Oh, you're here.
Wait, it's at 7:30, Peter said the name, it's 7:30, it's 7:30.
Welcome. Kenneth Finger?
Here.
Sylvia Hammer?
Present.
Evelyn Santiago?
Present.
Tamara Stewart?
Present.
And I'm Elsa Rubin, public member. Let the record show that we have quorum. I would like to, announce that the next meeting will be held next Tuesday, June 18th at 7 p.m., right? 7 p.m.
Yes.
At the Mount Vernon City Council chambers. And, if we don't have it, do you have any announcements?
No, I don't.
You don't, good. Okay. Before we start the meeting, I would like to go through a few rules and procedures for those testifying, tonight before the board. I have here 11 testimonies, all from the landlord. If you wish to address the board and you have not signed in advance, this is the opportunity to come forward and write your name here. Each individual will get 3 minutes, and people representing organizations will get 5 minutes. If you have materials to support your testimony, please bring them to our counsel, Peter STECKER, and he will distribute it to us. When you finish your presentation at the podium, please stay there in case the members of the board have any questions for you. And also, I want to remind you that your comments should be addressed to the members of the board and not to the public members or talking among yourselves. And last but not least, I will ask you to silence your phones. I'll do the myself too, so that we don't have any interruptions. And with that said, I'm going to call the first person I have in my list. Oh, I'd like to recognize that public member Eddie Mae Barnes is here. So let the record show that she's present. The first person I have in my list is Gilbert Algarate. And I apologize for if I mispronounce any last names, please.
Can you spell them out, please?
Algarate. Algarate. Is he here? Okay, so I'll move on to the next person, Anthony Diapis.
Can you spell that, please?
D''A''P''I''C''E. Are you representing a company, an organization, or as an individual?
I'm sorry.
Are you here as an individual or representing an organization?
I'm here as an individual.
You have 3 minutes.
I'm sorry?
You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Good evening, members of the board, and thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Anthony Diapis. I've been a real estate
You'll have to
broker.
talk into the microphone.
Hello? Hello? My name is Anthony Diapice. I'm a licensed real estate broker and property manager for the last 50 years. I have managed properties in Yonkers, New Rochelle, Eastchester, and New Rochelle. Since the implementation of the Emergency Tenants Protection Act, I've noticed that the vacancies have slowed down considerably over the last couple of years. People are not moving anymore because of the low rents, and the only way that people are moving now are either because, unfortunately, they're passed away or in a nursing home. As a matter of fact, I have a situation now where I have a beautiful 2-bedroom, 2-bath with a terrace in Eastchester, and the rent currently is $1,400.85. With the 1% increase, the rent would be $1,400 and change. The owners will not allow me to rent that apartment for that kind of money because he's fearful that that apartment is not going to become available again forever. That apartment will be passed down to family members for generations to come at that rent. Furthermore, tenants are abusing the spirit of the Emergency Tenants Protection Act. They are renting apartments and allowing other people to occupy the apartments. They're allowing people to move in that have children and pets, and we don't allow pets in our buildings. We had a situation last week where I had rented an apartment to a single gentleman with no pets, no children, no wife, no girlfriend. I got a call from the building. The police were at the building. They were complaining that the lady upstairs, the children were running around making noise. The dog was barking all night, and they called me to come and intervene. I knocked on the door, and the lady opened up the door, and I says, "You're not the person I rented this apartment to. I rented the apartment to a single gentleman." She said, "Oh yeah, well, he moved back to his country and he gave me the apartment to rent." Now, to get her out, the landlord's got to spend thousands of dollars in legal fees to get her out of that apartment because she has her boyfriend, the dog, and 2 children in a 1-bedroom apartment. They also taken advantage of renting their apartments to other people so they could allow their children to go to the schools in that district. The landlords are getting very discouraged and are refusing to rent the apartments because they only get a 1% increase. They cannot allocate necessary funds to do repairs to the buildings. The buildings are getting dilapidated. They're not allocating the painting of the apartments. They are asking me and begging me that I reduce the costs by eliminating jobs. They're realizing that a 1% increase in the rental units is insignificant to sustain a profitable building. In closing, I strongly believe that the ETPA should be revamped to serve the elderly, families, and the owners themselves. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? On the floor?
Oh, question. Where is the building located again?
I have buildings in White Plains, Eastchester, Yonkers, and New Rochelle.
And these incidents are happening throughout,
Oh, I'm a little hard of hearing.
what's this?
Is your microphone on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, the microphone.
She wants to know where these incidents you're talking about are happening.
I don't think it's working.
Well, I have the one incident in Eastchester, and I have the one incident in Yonkers, where, like I said before, I rented the apartment to a single gentleman, and he went back to his country and allowed a friend of his that had a boyfriend, 2 children, and a dog in a 1-bedroom. Now, subsequently, because of the fight that they had and the cops were involved, the lady downstairs decided to move out, and she's been in the building for 10 years, and she doesn't want to have that over her head. And she knows that now that we have to take legal action against her, it's going to take me a year to evict those people from upstairs. So she just decided to move.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person is Chris DeVille.
Good evening, members. My name is Chris DeFeo. I think you all know who I am. I didn't come last year having discouragement, but I decided that I better come this year. And I'm going to give Mr. Stickler some reading material to pass out to you guys, which I think is very important. I don't know if I have enough copies, so.
How many do you have?
Mr. DeFeo?
Yes.
Are you representing an organization?
Yes.
You have 5 minutes.
So anyway, a brief story. Back in COVID, when COVID was at its peak, I got a call from New York Community Bank. We have a lot of mortgages with that bank, and I won't say the gentleman's name, but he was concerned whether we were collecting rents. And I told him we were doing okay, and but the real problem was this change in the 2019 ETPA laws, and they should be concerned. And he pretty much told me then that the bank didn't get involved in politics. Well, the literature you're going to receive shortly, the bank is in trouble. The loan default surged 400% as rent-stabilized buildings bleed. Multifamily, the pressure point because of the bank's heavy exposure to the city's troubled rent stabilization stocks, out of $800 million of losses, accounted for $339 million in non-performing loans. So, you guys have a crisis here, and I warned you about this 2 years ago. I don't know where your numbers come from, but as I stated to you in the past, we run a tight ship in my organization, and I know that myself and my partners do a lot of work ourselves, which are not expensed in our numbers that we provide the state. As I also mentioned to you, that the buildings subject to ETPA are from 1974 and earlier. So from 1974, 50 years old is the youngest building. They are in constant need of pointing, roofing, windows, and boilers. The cost of these items are not listed in your expenses, and I had mentioned that to you as well. Any financial institution has reserves for replacements as a line item. That is normally a 6% of your total gross rent roll. You have to have, in order to come up with a true increase for rents, you have to have a line item for reserves for replacements. Otherwise, you will never know what the cost of a roof, or pointing, or boilers are, because those in your ETPA series, that's under other. It's not included in your numbers. Am I correct? Anybody know that? Anyone? You guys are all supposed to have financial backgrounds, right? Accounting backgrounds? No? Okay. So, normally in finance, when you buy a building or a bank looks at numbers, they always have reserved for replacements as a line item. Because the bank knows that you're going to need replacement boilers, hot water heaters, pointing, and all that kind of stuff. But your numbers don't represent that. So when we have to do a roof at $15 to $20 a square foot, and it's $200,000, where are we supposed to get this money? Doesn't exist. So either you take out a mortgage and you use that mortgage to pay for these expenses, and you move on. But now the problem is that interest rates have gone up. They're no longer 4%. They're 7.25%, 6.9%. They fluctuate every day. So my forecast is that owners are going to continue to get into trouble as these 5-year, 7-year, 10-year mortgages mature. New York Community Bank says they're still doing multifamily homes, but they are not. If you borrow at 70, 75% LTV, which is your loan to value, they'll come back to you after you fill out your application and say, well, we're only going to loan 40% LTV. You have to come up with $4 million. Sterling Bank is no longer out there doing multifamily loans. They say they are, but they're not. Sterling Bank now owns Santander and Hudson Valley banks. So the banking industry is consolidated in the New York market, but they don't want to do business with the TPA landlords anymore. These are facts. Read the literature and see what you think about it. Just today, I got a letter from United Healthcare. 16% proposed increase in healthcare. I went to the doctor the other day, and they charged me $175. It was the other day, 3 months ago. $175 for a visit for the emergency, whatever you call it, walk-in place. Doesn't my insurance cover this? No. I have a $5,000 deductible, and they're gonna go up another 16%. Like I said, I don't know how other landlords are doing it. I understand a lot of landlords don't provide you with these income surveys, but you really need to find out what's going on, because these numbers, they don't seem accurate to me. To continue, in the city of Mount Vernon, they instituted 2 years ago a $500 per unit from TBW called the Beautification Act of Mount Vernon. So if you have a 100-unit building in Mount Vernon, now you have to pay $500 per unit annually for the beautification of Mount Vernon. Where do we get that increase from? We can't pass it on to the tenants with no increases. I'm surprised none of the other landlords have brought that up.
Mr. DeFeo?
Yes.
Time is up, can you please wrap up?
Oh, well, I guess I'm done. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Any questions for Mr. DeFeo? What is your organization?
Oh, yeah, they're all different. Each building's a different company, depending on, you know,
Can you give me the main one?
the Feo Brothers. Okay?
Thank you.
No questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next person is Lisa DeRosa.
Okay.
No.
Hi,
Hi, you representing an organization?
yes, I am. This is very
Which
loud.
organization is that?
Ready?
What organization?
The BRI and DeRosa Builders.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Lisa DeRosa, and I am here as both the president of the BRI and as a property owner. I am here tonight to debunk the myths surrounding net operating income and depreciation. Net operating income is a tool used to equalize the value of different properties so they can be compared. I have created 3 fictional properties that were built at the same time, are the same size, and have the same number of units. As you can see, the NOI is the same for all 3 properties. However, if you take it a step further and calculate the mortgage interest and depreciation, you will see the actual net income, the money that's left over afterwards, and it varies greatly. So why is the mortgage interest removed from calculating NOI? Very simply, the value of a property should not decrease because you had to borrow money to purchase it. For example, if we both lived in the same co-op building, I'm in Unit 4G and you're in Unit 5G. Same size, same layout, comparable view, but I have a mortgage and you don't. They are worth the same price. You have to take out the mortgage expense to compare 2 units, 2 houses or 2 buildings. But that doesn't mean the expense isn't real. Truthfully, I don't even know why the HCR reporting even gives you NOI when the number you need to focus on is net income. That's the number that's left over after interest and depreciation is subtracted. Those are the funds that are hopefully left over that allow property owners to make actual repairs and not Band-Aid fixes and make a profit. And it's that profit that creates jobs and provides safe housing. My next topic is depreciation. What is depreciation? Many think it's a made-up fictional number that's pulled out of the air. Actually, it's a cost you incurred that you paid taxes on in the year you incurred it. That means you installed a new elevator or put a new roof on your property and spent the money, but you were not able to deduct that as an expense. The IRS has very strict depreciation schedules that dictate the amount of years an item could be depreciated over. On page 2 in the handout you have in front of you, there are 2 analyses in one for a building with a new roof and the same building without a new roof. The roof costs $30,000 and has a depreciation schedule of 20 years. In this example, you spent $30,000 this year and had a loss in actual cash flow, but still paid taxes on the $6,500 of net income. The depreciation actually defers and spreads out the expense you can take to $1,500 over 20 years. That money was still spent, just without financial benefit. In the past years, I have seen presenters come before you and incorrectly state that property owners make a 40% profit or a 25% profit. That's just not true, and it's very misleading because they're using NOI and not the actual cash flow or the net income. I can confidently speak for every property owner in this room that with those numbers, we wouldn't be here before you. It is not news that Westchester County needs more affordable housing. Actually, the study that the Westchester County commissioned 5 years ago calculated the amount to over 11,000 units needed. The way to that number is not by financially strangling the people before you who are trying to chip away at that goal. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Rosa? Thank you. Next person I have is Alex Alessar.
Good evening. My name is Alex Lazai. I am founder and president of Black Mountain Capital. Black Mountain Capital is a mortgage and real estate finance company. I've been in the lending industry for nearly 25 years. Some of you may have seen my sign on North Avenue, 371 North Avenue, big sign about 50 feet long. I wanted to just provide you some intel in terms of what's transpiring internally within the lending industry firsthand. On a day-to-day basis, we analyze, evaluate deals, perform a level of due diligence before we bring a deal to market. Essentially what we do is we raise monies, whether it's debt or equity, for investors that invest in real estate. Whether it's a consumer buying a first home or an investor buying a multifamily building or developing a property. I can tell you firsthand, here are some of the challenges that we're dealing with on a daily basis. Aside from the fact that I have private banking experience and I've worked at big box banks, big money center banks, I've also seen what's transpired within the local and community banks. And it's no known secret that a lot of these banks have failed, and there's going to be a tidal wave of banks that are going to continue to fail. That's just the environment that we're in right now. The cost of doing business is extremely high for businesses, consumers, as well as for investors. Here's what happens. You purchase a property, you have a certain amount of money you put down on a property. It's really important, right? So you figure out what the economics look like. You're making an investment for your future as an annuity or just as a passive investor. Essentially, when these rates, skyrocket the way they have in the past few years, anybody who took out loans, while interest rates are extremely low, are going to be in for what we call a shell shock, or in this case, a period of time in which these loans are not going to perform, and they're not going to perform for a variety of reasons. The cash flow is not there. You can't increase rents. The cost of capital has now doubled on you. You don't have monies to put into the building, and the bank has the right to call the loan, which means they can demand payment. If you can't refinance, or ultimately sell the building. The impact that has on the community, I've seen firsthand. Growing up in the city and being a native New Yorker, these buildings are going to start to deteriorate. And that's the reality at the end of the day. If investors don't have money to invest in properties, they're not going to benefit from it. The tenants won't benefit from it, nor the town. And in order to achieve any sort of profitability, typically investors reinvest those monies in those buildings. That's if they are good landlords. And most people are good landlords. Most people care about their properties. at least most of the people that I know. And the impacts that it's gonna have across the board with lending, if these loans begin to mature, and when they do, that these landlords can't refinance or get out under from these loans, the loan is ultimately or becomes in default. The investor has two options. They put more money in the deal, right? In this case, if they don't have money, they can't put money into the deal. The cash flow is not there, they default on the building, and it'll take quite some time for these lenders or banks to ultimately foreclose on these properties, continue allowing the building to deteriorate. So, you really have a cluster of a situation where it's a losing proposition for everybody across the board. Something really has to give, and the market will essentially do what the market does, and what the market's been doing, what the market will continue to do for the foreseeable future, is nothing to benefit anybody along the way. Whether it's a business, an investor, or a consumer, that's the reality. And really what we're looking at is a hurricane, a storm, that is going to impact everybody across the board. The expectation is that at some point in the near future, as in this year, there's already cracks in the real estate market. The only way you can figure out is it's pretty simple. Look at the amount of bank failures there are. When you have community banks failing, it's a domino effect. And the investor will have to put more money into these deals. If they can't afford to do so, these loans will go into default. And that's the reality. Do you have any questions? Anything that I can answer? Yes.
What if the loan goes into default, what happens with the building?
Well, in this case, most cases, the lenders have right of the rents being transferred. They take control of the rents, but the improvements aren't going to be there for these properties. The banks have to foreclose on these properties. New York's got a backlog. We're still coming out and digging out over the COVID era. These banks are not management companies. They're not landlords. These are lenders. They're not structured to manage properties, which is why you also have a line item for management fees in the event the bank has to take a property over. But that management fee is just to pay for somebody's time, not for the improvements that go into these properties. It's a domino effect. It's a losing proposition for everybody across the board. Everyone loses. Who wants to live in a roach-infested apartment? Who wants to live where they don't have running water or hot water or roof leaks? These investors are critical. Developers, builders, investors are critical to housing. If they're not buying housing, it wasn't too long ago. I mean, Harlem has been an incredible market that's seen a resurgence. Remember Harlem back in the 80s? Anybody? Look at the amount of time it's taken to rebuild Harlem. I invest in Harlem. I have partners who invest in affordable housing and development. It's taken a very long time to get there. It's a domino effect across New York State. Banks are failing. These investors can't afford to pay back their loans. They're going to default on these loans. And these buildings will continue to deteriorate. And it takes years to find a buyer who's willing to do the capital expenditures to improve these buildings, put the amount of money, cash. Banks are not lending. Retail banks are out of business. So what's the next best thing? Alternative financing. Alternative financing is higher cost. To Mr. DeFeo's point, 6% is a gift in today's market. 7% is a gift in today's market. To buy a building as an alternative investor or qualifying for an alternative program, you're easily in the high single digits, 8s, 9s, and 10s. And you've got to put down a bigger down payment, 30, 35, 40%. I do this on a daily basis. I can tell you the lending challenges are reminiscent of what happened during the financial crisis. When banks pull out of the market, what are you left with? Private capital, alternative capital, that all comes at a cost. It's a domino effect. It's going to affect everybody across the board, and it already has. I see it on a daily basis. Whether it's a declination, whether it's a loan maturing, you got to remember something. So if you look at the timelines in 2020, 21, these loans were at 3 and 4%. Let's say you lock in a 5-year deal. What's going to happen in the next 12 to 24 months? Those loans are going to be due. You are at 75%. The building is not performing. You're not collecting rents. There's no rent increases. That impacts your cash flow. There's line item for replacement reserves, interest reserves, capital expenditures. When you can't meet those criteria, you have covenants in your loan agreements. The bank can arbitrarily put your loan into default simply for the sole fact that you don't have enough money set aside to manage the building.
I believe, Mr. Chairman.
I have a question. Would you consider a reasonable scenario
in which the landlord defaults, the bank takes the property. Does the bank then make a decision as to whether or not to pay the taxes, for example? And if they don't pay the taxes, does it result in the municipality taking possession of the property?
It's a great question. So an REO property, which is a real estate owned property, by a bank, once a bank has foreclosed on the property, they're essentially responsible. They become the landlord. It's highly unlikely that a bank may not pay taxes, but in the event they don't because they've gone bankrupt, how do you collect taxes on a property where there's ultimately no investor to be able to maintain or manage that property?
Isn't that what happened in the 70s and the 80s in Harlem, the Bronx, and various other places? That's how the city of New York ended up with thousands and thousands of units, which they didn't have the funds or the wherewithal or
Correct.
the expertise to manage.
Correct.
Those buildings became abandoned.
Correct. Domino effect, to your point. Everybody suffers. We do consumer lending, we do business lending for operating businesses, investor finance, commercial real estate finance. It's a domino effect. Everybody gets hurt every step along the way.
Especially the tenants.
Of course the tenants. Who wants to sleep under a leaking roof? No heat.
Anybody else has a question?
I'm going to leave you with this last point. You know, as an investor myself, you know, you look at it as an investment or to create some sort of wealth, whether it's a home, right, that you pass on to your heirs and your children, or whether it's an investment property that generates income. People do this for a living. Being an investor is a full-time job. It's not a part-time job. Whether you're buying a home, operating a business, or investing in a piece of real estate, managing a property, I know firsthand, my father woke me up when I was 10 years old and said, wake up, we gotta go. Go where? I got school tomorrow. The boiler shut down. There's a toilet leak. At 10 years old, I was waking up with my father to go do the improvements he needs to do to manage his building firsthand. He did it himself. Investors, at a certain degree, depending on the size of the building, can't afford to hire a management company. They become their own property manager. So when you look at all these costs and they dig into being able to maintain a level of profit, that they will manage these properties themselves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I know firsthand. And when you do that, you're doing that for a reason. You can't afford to pay for all the additional expenses that you incur running a property. A tenant doesn't pay. Okay, no problem. If it's 1 out of 20 units, how about 5 stop paying or can't afford to pay?
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Next person on my list is Tim Foley.
Hello.
Are you representing an
I'm
organization?
representing an organization.
You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. So, good evening. My name is Tim Foley. I'm the CEO of the Building and Realty Institute, the BRI. As always, we appreciate your thorough review of the data, the statistics, the overall economic picture, and this orderly public process. I particularly want to commend you on the discussion at last Thursday's research and analysis presentation meeting. For a number of years, there was not a lot of discussion at those meetings, aside from a few cursory questions, but this year, we heard from members of the board about the issues you were thinking about and the questions that you had, and honestly, that level of dialogue is very helpful, particularly for me and our organization in determining what information or research we already have that can help answer those questions. So thank you, and please keep it up. With that in mind, I want to use my comments to address some of the issues specifically raised at that session. And as I did last year, I have also sent a supplemental packet of materials to the Rent Guidelines Board email address. These aren't items I or the BRI wrote, but they're the primary sources that inform the observations that I'm making now. One of the questions that member Aqua raised was about what any potential rent increase might do to housing affordability for the tenants who currently occupy or are likely to occupy rent-stabilized units. And since we at the BRI spend quite a lot of time working on issues of housing affordability, we can actually answer that quite specifically. Typically, our stop the bleeding request from this board is for a rent increase that at least keeps pace with inflation. Until 1991 or so, this board typically did vote for a rent increase in that range, and as recently as the early 2010s, the board were often plus or minus 10% of inflation. Inflation this year is at 3.5%, as you've seen in the reports provided by HCR. Now, in those same reports, the average rent for the 14,668 total units in the sample that do provide heat and hot water averaged out to be $1,473 a month. I'll note that includes a couple thousand market rate apartments also included the sample, and that's gonna skew the results, but let's take that average at face value. If this board were to vote for a 3.5% increase to match inflation, that would be an average of $52 per month. Now let's take a look at the other side of the economy. It somehow still doesn't make the headlines, but we continue to be in the strongest job market we've seen in decades. The unemployment rate nationally is under 4%, and it's at 3.7% here in Westchester. Wages and salaries increased by 4.1% from March to March, which is also 3 years in a row of real wage growth. In fact, the wage growth for this past year at 4.1% was higher than the rate of inflation. Were you to proceed with a 3.5% increase at that average of $52 a month, the average worker in Westchester's wage growth would cover it and then some. Now, wage growth is uneven, and you might be right to be concerned about whether the disproportionately low-income residents of rent-stabilized housing were seeing those gains, but we have an answer to that too. The Economic Policy Institute came out with their State of Working America Wages 2023 report in March. I've included it in the supplemental email. I'm going to quote from it directly. Quote, real wages of low-wage workers grew 12.1% between 2019 and 2023. Wage growth among low and middle wage workers over the pandemic business cycle has outpaced not only higher wage groups over the same period, but also its own growth compared to the prior 4 business cycles. Black men, young workers, and working mothers experienced particularly fast wage growth over the last 4 years, end quote. We know that's not everybody. There are still people who are in poverty and those who are struggling, but that's going to be the case whether you vote for an increase that is 0 or something in the range of inflation. The simple truth is that this year, of all years, a modest increase can be absorbed without disrupting affordability. And the main metric for affordability in housing is put out by HUD each year. It is based on area median income, and it's the basis for the various local ordinances for affordable housing, such that people with those income levels would spend no more than 30% of their income on rent. Typically for new construction, which we deal with a lot, the target is either 60% area median income or 80%. At $1,473 per month, the average rent stabilized unit is at 54% AMI for an individual and 38% for a family of 4. Well below the goals of affordability that we're struggling to achieve. And if this board were to approve an increase at that 3.5% just to keep pace with costs, you'd still be at 56% AMI for an individual and 39% for a family of 4. The numbers barely budge. I am at my time. I do have some additional follow-up questions that I put into my written statement. I'm happy to answer them now, or I'm happy to just bid you a good night, but I just want to leave you with the question that Member Aqua asked: can you provide a modest rent increase that keeps pace with all of the cost increases that property owners have presented to you that will preserve affordability? Absolutely, and I hope that you will.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Ford? Thank you. Next person is Jerry Hollihan.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr.
Sure.
Hollihan. I believe you represent an organization, correct?
Yes, I represent myself. No, I represent the Apartment Owners Advisory Council, which is a subgroup of the BRI. And I'm Jerry Houlihan. I'm with Houlihan Partners. We're a family-owned business since 1891, specializing in commercial real estate in Westchester. Here we go again as owners pleading for you for some reasonable rent increases 5 years after the passing of the industry-crushing HSTPA. And at this time, 5 years ago, I, along with 20 other Westchester apartment owners, met with Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins at her office in Yonkers and told her that with a broad brush of this new law, within 4 to 5 years, she, along with her co-legislators in Mobley, will have ruined this industry. And they have. I passed out an article from Forbes Real Estate written last week entitled "The Aftershocks of Rent Stabilization," which specifically outlines the damages caused by HSTPA within the dire economy that we're experiencing, notwithstanding what Mr. Foley had talked about. The cost of milk is up 300%. Yeah, you know already. Highlighted is the fact that the values of rent-stabilized apartments have dropped in value by 30 to 50%. 30 to 50%. This is primarily due to HSTPA, but also due to the fact that interest rates, as it was testified earlier, have increased by 5.25% between March 2022 and July 2023. So it's just poor management all around. In January of this year, I was hired as a consultant for the purchase of an apartment building here in a major lower Westchester city. The contract was signed for a price of about $100,000 a unit. But after doing some due diligence with the buyers and educating the sellers on HSTPA, we closed in April of this year at a discount of 15%, at $84,000 per apartment. Notable too is the fact that there are apartments on the ground level used as the seller's offices, but because of the law, it made 0 sense to renovate the apartments because the rents would be less than the cost of operating them, which according to the surveys which you received, costs us $1,160 per month. Thus, in this example, this law is removing housing. And to give further value comparison, in 2017 in the same city, I brokered a sale of an apartment building for $230,000 a unit. So when others provide testimony, false testimony, like landlords are making 20 to 40% profits on their investments, please refer to this article containing real facts, real data. Educate yourself on this industry. The more you pass unreasonable increases and crush us, the more the very people you're trying to protect will suffer. Do you have any questions?
Any questions? No? Thank you. Michael Kessner. Mr. Kessner, are you
Yes.
representing individual or representing a
Individual.
You have 3 minutes.
Okay. Good evening, members of the Rent Guidelines Board. My name is Michael Kessner. I'm an owner of Rent Stabilized Apartments in Westchester County. This is my first time speaking before the board. I felt compelled to have my voice heard tonight because owners of rent stabilized buildings are struggling tremendously right now. It's no secret that owners of residential apartment buildings are constantly vilified by politicians, tenant activists, and in the media, especially owners of rent stabilized buildings. I never use the term landlord in referring to my profession because it sounds so antiquated, honestly. Frankly, it's embarrassing to be called a landlord. It harkens back to the days of feudalism hundreds of years ago. The term landlord is constantly used by the media and tenant activist groups to characterize property owners as villains, robber barons, profiteers, and the like. But the truth is far from that. We are local small business owners, we are entrepreneurs, we are mom and pop shops, we are family-owned businesses. We are residents of Westchester County, and we provide employment for many other residents of the community. We are hardworking people trying to do the best we can, navigating a labyrinth of rules, regulations, and oversight that are constantly changing against us. I could think of no other business, large and certainly not small businesses, that are more heavily regulated than rent-stabilized apartment buildings in New York State. Health insurance companies, utility companies, grocery store owners, internet and phone providers, pharmaceutical companies, and owners of fair market apartment buildings. They all provide staples of living just as owners of rent-stabilized apartments do. But they have the ability to charge whatever the market will bear for their products. Owners of rent-stabilized buildings have no such ability. Since the passage of HSTPA in 2019, politicians in Albany cut off virtually any path owners have to get rents closer to what the market might actually bear upon a vacancy. Since then, they have tightened the noose even further by passing more legislation restricting the ability for owners to increase rents. With interest rates extremely elevated for the past couple of years and no relief in sight, owners of rent-stabilized buildings are in a lot of trouble as their mortgages come due. Values of rent-stabilized properties have plummeted. They are toxic assets under the current laws. Many are worth less than the mortgages that encumber them. Banks aren't lending nearly as much as they did previously, if at all. Many owners of stabilized buildings are underwater. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow anymore. Since Albany has basically castrated rent-stabilized property owners, the plain truth is that you, the members of the Rent Guidelines Board, are the only game in town to help struggling owners right now. Legislators in Albany only have one goal in mind, and that is to stay in power. They believe passing more and more anti-owner legislation achieves that goal without thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions. You have the luxury of not having to face the voters every election cycle. The minimal increases this board has granted over the past decade have not been reasonable, fair, nor enough to keep buildings afloat, especially when expenses have skyrocketed across the board due to inflation and other price pressures over the past 3 years. Please, think about the big picture here. A minimum of 5% increase for a one-year lease is desperately needed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
So what, in your opinion, would be a fair, reasonable amount so that landlords can stay afloat?
Well, as I just said, I think 5% would certainly, I think is a minimum that's needed, especially since there's been rent freezes for recent years, and the 1% and 2% now really is nothing. It does nothing for us.
Any other questions?
Good afternoon, good evening. Do you find that the minimal increases have impacted your ability to do major capital improvements or apartment improvements?
Absolutely. Yeah.
In what way?
I'm sorry?
In what way?
In what way what? Yeah.
In what way have they impacted?
The lack of increases, there's just not enough cash flow coming in to pay for any major repairs. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, just not enough money.
Anybody else? I do, yeah.
Okay, so the increases that we have basically put in place, let's say. We can't hear you.
There's no way to hear you.
You need to speak something.
Press the button.
It's the black one. It's the black one. To your left. To your left. Left. Does this thing work?
Yes.
Yes. No. The black one.
No, the black one doesn't work.
You gotta press the button.
Press the button. Press the button.
Press the button on the.
It's the black one. That one is for the recorder.
Test.
There you go. Okay.
Thank you.
We were told to use this one, just for that. Okay, so question, based on the increases that we have, voted on, okay, for the past, let's say 3 years, probably 3 to 4 years, what would you say the type of, repairs, needed? What type of repairs would you say you as landlord or landlord yourself or in general What type of repairs are you able to make with those increases?
Able to make,
Or able?
basic, you know, if a sink is leaking, obviously if, you have a leak coming from one apartment into another, which, look, most of these rent stabilized buildings are, some of them are even 100 years old or more. I mean, there's just constant maintenance and upkeep, you know, painting apartments and fixing leaks is basically the most, you know, servicing your boiler, making sure that your tenants have heat and hot water all winter long. Those sort of basic stuff.
And you would determine that as like minor repairs, I mean, versus like major repairs needed, like for the building?
Sure, well, the other thing is, being that these buildings are so old, there's constant need to do brick pointing. Most of them are brick buildings, so you know, with all the extreme weather these days, we're getting these big storms and the wind blowing rain, and that's just causing extensively more leaking in our buildings than ever before. So there's that to have to deal with. It's very expensive to do brick pointing work. I mean, you have guys hanging on scaffoldings outside the building. It's really nonstop in a lot of our buildings.
Okay, what about extermination, like maintenance in that form, like to maintain health and safety?
Sure, I mean, extermination isn't one of the major expenses, but it's certainly a cost. But yeah, you know, what goes with it is also to prevent, the reality is these exterminators, they go and they put a little spray or a trap, it doesn't really fix the problem. So what you end up having to do is do more work by, you know, sealing up all the holes. You have to hire a handyman to really get in there and seal everything up behind an exterminator.
So how often would, typically is, let's say, extermination done in the building? I don't want to belabor the point, but-
Exterminations every 2 to 4 weeks, typically.
6 days a month.
6 days a month there, it depends.
6 days a month.
Oh, per month?
They're doing so much construction in White Plains that all the mice are coming into our building. And what you do, you can't have mice going in people's kitchen where there's food and they're cooking for their family. We've had to bump it up to 6 days a month.
Per month. And typically, what would it be before that? Before having to increase?
2 to 4 days a month. 2 to 4 days a month.
Per month?
Who's she speaking on behalf of? Is that just her? Is that all the owners or?
Well,
I'm in White Plains and
just
there's
filling in
construction
what
going
you
on
said.
all over.
Please,
And
come
we
to
just
the
started-
microphone.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay,
That's fine.
Mr.
Where are your buildings, please?
We have buildings throughout southern Westchester County.
Can you give us a location?
We have New Rochelle, Yonkers, White Plains, Greenberg, Eastchester, Portchester.
Roughly how many units?
About 300 stabilized units.
I believe Ms. Santiago has a question.
Yeah, no, it's not a question, it's a comment about what Mr. Rosa said. I live in White Plains, not too far from your buildings, and I know it's true. The mice
Nightmare.
are, I don't know where they're coming from, I'm just glad that they're not rats.
Yes, I
But-
can talk to you afterwards about some solutions that we found.
Okay.
Because we've been battling this for a long time and it's been a huge expense for us. And it's an expense that,
Please, come
like,
to
it's
the
not like,
microphone.
I believe.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Come up, Joanne.
Yeah, no, it's your testimony, she's done.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the input. I mean,
Anybody else has a question? Excuse me? Anybody else has a question? I do have to say, I agree with you on the term landlord is obsolete and out of pace in this society. Something has to be done to change that.
Well, I think it's used purposely as a derogatory term towards property owners. And it's usually by the groups that calling for the more political correctness in society and the way we address certain groups. I think are the ones that use that term mostly.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in my list is Howie Ravico.
Good evening. My name is Howie Ravikoff. My family owns and operates a 29-unit ETPA rent-regulated building in the village of Rochelle. I've been here many times before. Today, my plea is no more and no less urgent than it has been in the past. Please give us a decent guideline. Today, I'm asking for a 5% increase on a 1-year renewal and a 10% increase on a 2-year renewal. Let me tell you where I'm coming from. 5% will cover inflation for the past year and a little more since last year's guideline was less than inflation. You're wondering what inflation was. Tim mentioned it earlier. This year inflation is 3.5%. The year prior, inflation was 4.9%. Look, I know this system is broken. You're operating in it, I'm operating in it, and the task before you makes no sense. I'm hopeful that the 8 of you can agree that rents should go up by a factor of inflation. And in my opinion, if you stick to that rule, this process, for the most part, will make sense year in and year out. Look, you already know it, but if you'll allow me a few moments, I'll touch on why this process doesn't work. You are all provided a set of information that we owners are legally bound to provide, correct? I have a question for you, but please don't raise your hand to answer it. Just ask yourself the question. Do I believe the revenue number presented to me represents rent revenue for ETPA rent-regulated units in Westchester County? That's the question I'm asking you to ask yourselves. Do you think that revenue number is only rent-regulated units? It's not. The number you've been provided, the numbers that the owners provided, include non-regulated units. It was mentioned earlier, I want to highlight it to you now. The number you've been provided as revenue also includes commercial units. We provide it in the survey as a separate line item, but you get it as a combined grand total. I hope you're able to take that into account. I'm not quite sure how you can. You weren't given the breakdown. You folks have no jurisdiction over those two categories, the two categories of non-ETPA regulated units and commercial units. I don't know why you've been given that information, but you have. It makes no sense. My next question for you, do you think the costs provided to you include all the costs associated with running an ETPA rent-regulated building? Don't answer it out loud. I know you're screaming to do it. Answer to yourself. Do you think there are costs associated with running these buildings that's not listed on the survey data that was provided to you? You guessed it, the data is incomplete. Many, if not all the owners in the room today, all of whom submitted information included in your package, carry a mortgage. It's likely the single largest expense any building incurs, and it's not considered in your data. The system is broke. The numbers we're obliged to provide are not the numbers you've been given, and they're not the numbers you need to consider. So I think you have a choice. You can use the bad data. You can ask questions and dig deeper and see what additional information you can gather and learn and understand better to be better informed, and I encourage you to do so. Or you can do something readily available, it's accepted, it's simple. Go with inflation. Just a suggestion. Either way, I ask of you, as you continue through this process, Please recognize the numbers before you and the conclusions you so desperately want to draw cannot be derived from bad data. And that packet of information is riddled with bad data. I'd like to offer you an additional perspective, and perhaps this will help you during your deliberations. When the owners don't get what they need, buildings, apartments, and tenants all suffer. Please don't tell a child who resides in a building that it's okay. I'm almost finished. Please don't tell a child that resides in a building that it's okay if an elevator is broken 3 days every week. Please don't tell that child when she moves into a new home that she should expect the unit hasn't been touched for 30 years. Please don't tell that child that cold, dark halls of a building that can't keep up with its expenses, that's an okay way to grow up. Please give us a 5% increase on a 1-year lease. And if you're able, I'd really appreciate a substantial flat increase on units that are 50% below market. Let us tell children in our apartments that when the elevator works properly, when there's a new opportunity to move into a new home, when you walk into a building, you can tell the people in that building care. I'd like you to give me an increase so that I can show them we all care. We all deserve to care about a place we call home. Thank you. So it wasn't all that long ago that the Red Guidelines Board was able to give us a low rent increase. If you're able to do that tonight, I'm asking for you to do it again. If there's a unit whose rent is 50% below median area income average, I'd like to see a flat increase on that unit of $100 a month. Those kinds of numbers will help owners like ourselves get out from underneath the rock that the state's putting on us. It'll help us run these buildings properly so that we can afford to run the buildings that we all need to provide these tenants. There's no other option. New construction doesn't touch this market. When there's new construction, we see it everywhere. White Plains, New Rochelle, Mount Vernon, Portchester. And you talk about affordable units. Those units are a fortune. They're significantly more expensive than the units I'm providing. And I imagine if you ask all the other owners in the room, they'll tell you the same thing. Those affordable units are several hundred, if not several $1,000s more than the units we're providing. And we don't have the increase from you to keep up.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
This person is Joseph Red. So here. So he's not here. Then I'm gonna call the last person in my list, Donna Cosano.
Last but hopefully not least.
Can you spell your last name?
Cosenza, like the area in Italy. I am a small building owner. My husband and I have a 8-unit building in Hastings-on-Hudson. We've owned it for 40 years. At that time, we had another business. We had a delicatessen 7 days a week, 95 hours a week for each of us. But our thought was, hey, someday this will be paid off. That'll be our retirement. It has to make money to be retirement. Over the years, we've added a new roof, we've added new windows, we fixed the walkway and the steps. We've done as many repairs and maintenance by ourselves that we can to keep the costs down. Of course, this doesn't include heat, water, or taxes, because those increases we can't control. One of the last updates we did recently, a few years ago, was replace the entire driveway and parking area. The whole thing, rebuilt it. It was almost $15,000. You were talking for an 8-unit building, this would come out to $1,875 per unit. I mean, think about it, you divide it out. This was considered maintenance, so we could not get submit for an MCI. That's a lot to swallow for a small building owner who does our repairs for ourselves. Our insurance has increased this year, 22.7%. We went back to our insurance carrier, we went to other carriers. We had our agent quote it. Some carriers won't even come back, they just decline because they said our roof is too old. Now, I mean, okay, we've had the building 40 years, now the roof is coming up to, I don't know, 20 years old, 20-something years old. But the cost of that roof is going to be at least $20,000, if not up to maybe $24,000. Now you're talking, divide that out, that's like $2,000 per unit. Yes, that can be an MCI, but through umpteen years, umpteen months that you divide it out. How do we pay for that? Where is it coming from? We're no longer allowed vacancy increases. We can, if someone moves out, somebody else moves in, where we get that 0%, that 1%, that's it. Some people, we've had, most of our tenants have been very respectful. They'll call us for the littlest thing before it comes a big thing. We go down, take time out of our day, we'll go down and fix whatever it is before it causes something big. But some of these people, they move out. They've only been there a year. We could have fist-sized holes punched in doors. We could have bathroom ceramic tile floor ruined in just 1 year. They won't tell us about a leak under a sink, and they'll ruin the whole vanity, the kitchen floor, the cupboards, whatever. So it's not just washing and refinishing floors and painting walls. This is expensive, and if we can't get some kind of a vacancy increase or some kind of a decent increase, we need it. Homeowners are moving upstate or out of state because they can't afford the taxes anymore. Part of their tax increase is certiorari's, because we need our taxes reduced, because that's been a big increase. Right now, as I said, our insurance this year increased 22.7%. I have to swallow it and pay it. Our water increased 30%. I believe if these tenants would own their own apartments, if they had, like a co-op, if they had to pay their own heat, their own water, their own taxes, their own maintenance, or perform or hire out, they would do their own repairs, they may be more understanding of what we need as an increase, because it takes money to do that. The Rent Guidelines Board is tasked with deciding the percentage of rent increase based on cost and nothing else. Nothing else. It doesn't matter what people can afford. It's cost increase, and that's what we need. That's it.
Thank you.
Any questions?
No.
Good.
Thank you. Oh, well, I believe that concludes the testimony of the people present here. Thank you for attending, and thank you for participating. So can I have a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn. Second? Thank you. Meeting is adjourned. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Home safe?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. No, I mean, it was fine. We actually,
I wanted to appeal to their,
later times, they had another board that was meeting in a year, so, we didn't even get started.
actually, this is the best presentation for everybody after Not a speaker, I'm a doer.
Supposed to encourage people to come in. Come on.
All right, nice to see you. Thanks so much.
Right, so she's not getting up.
Come back and be like, yeah, it's been a long time.
I wanted to give you a chance to expound a little. That's why I asked you the question.
I appreciate it. I didn't fully grasp, but
That's
honestly,
what
I'm a little nervous.
That's what I don't want to do. You were fine. Yeah. There's no large here. Been lucky to get one or two shifts this year. Little Kingston. Well, that's what it is.
You still practice?
Didn't matter then.
You remember me? A lot of years.
Good night. Thank you for your work.
Take care.
Thank you so much for your service.
Are you in half or? No, I mean you, like you focus on one area. Right? Yeah, are you up here?